hydrogen and oxygen. Neither hydrogen nor oxygen is wet. They're both gases. But when you combine them into the form H2O, that is water, we get a new property, which is wetness. It's great, it's something extra that wasn't there in the original things that we get when things are put together. So scientifically, this happens all around us all the time, that when you bring things together, you get something that wasn't there in either of the original things, but which is there in the combination between the two, which becomes something that emerges when you bring things together. So, to go back to water again, water itself doesn't look like crystalline snowflake structures. But when you bring water molecules together in the form of snow, you get these elaborate snowflakes. That's not there inherent in the water molecule. Like when you look at a water molecule, it doesn't look like a miniature snowflake that just becomes a larger snowflake when you put them together. That pattern is something that only emerges when these things come together. And patterns emerge like fractals and all sorts of natural things. So the earth, you know, when it freezes or in certain types of terrain, it forms like geometric kinds of patterns. That's not there in the grain of dirt or in the piece of ice. That's something that emerges when you get all the pieces together. You get this larger pattern. So it's there in like from the smallest things like water to whole larger systems. It's there in the animal kingdom. People, when talking about emergence, talk about ants. And an individual ant is a very stupid creature, right? It's a very, very tiny, tiny brain. But when you have a colony of ants, they can perform very complex functions, and they have complex systems for how they communicate to each other. That like one, if all the gatherer ants were killed off, the other ants will change their structures and change their roles to make sure that they still have gatherers, and they do this through leaving chemical trails to each other. And then when you have ants together, they build these complex warrens of nests, and they do this all like communally, something that they cannot do alone. You only have a couple ants, they are not going to build a nest. They are not going to be able to carry away your entire picnic basket like they do in the old-fashioned cartoons. So animals have emergence. People have emergent qualities that we also have too. In our bodies, our whole systems are more complex and can do more together than our individual organs can conceive of alone, than the pieces of us. And when you put it all together, we get thoughts, we get emotions, we get love, we get passion, we get anger, we get hate, we get all these things because of this complex system. But the love isn't there in the pancreas, right? It's not even just there in the brain. And then when you put people together in complex systems, you know, you build one house, the whole city isn't there inherent in the house. But you put another house down, and suddenly you have a lane between the two. You put 3 or 4 houses down, and a street begins to emerge. You put down 20 houses, and you develop a whole road system, maps of travel and patterns that people traverse on a daily basis. That wasn't there in the first house. But the pattern, something greater than individual pieces, emerges when you have groups of people together. So I started thinking about this and emergent theology. Now, emergent theology can kind of take 2 forms. One is the sort of creationist view that says that when, like creationists are prone to looking at the eye and saying the eye could never develop. The scientists will argue about this and say, no, the eye doesn't prove God. But for creationists, they would say, these complex systems in our body prove God because they couldn't have, each piece was needed to become the system. But each piece itself might not seem to have a reason it would exist without this final purpose in mind. Now, as I said, scientists will break that down and say, no, the eye really does, like light receptors, light and dark, that had a purpose beyond the entire eye, and each piece of it does make sense in a developmental path. But for some people, they believe that looking at this fact that small things make up bigger things, that there's something greater that happens that is more than the individual whole, more than the individual pieces, that greater something that happens argues for God. And then other people in what they call syn theology, which is not C-Y-N, it's S-Y-N theology, they believe that we are building God. That all this process together is creating something larger, something bigger, and that science and religion will come together, and God is what emerges out of this great process of humanity and the earth. I don't know. Could be. I don't think it's proven. Either one. Could be God. Could be not God. That's why I'm an agnostic, because I'm like, yeah, these things all make sense, but they're not proof. And I think it's possible God. It's also possible no God. So, but what emergence told me is when I think about the church, there I find the importance of emergence to me. That's where, to me, this becomes really meaningful, because we, together, are something much greater than we are individually. Each one of us can do social justice. Each one of us can do pastoral care. Each one of us can do worship, can do administration. But we are something greater than that when we come together. And that something is beloved community. And beloved community doesn't happen with one person. It's not there inherent in each and every one of you, maybe, when you're alone. It's something that only happens when we come together. Unitarian Universalism we call a covenantal faith, which means that rather than being a faith where we're creedal, where we say you have to believe this to become a Unitarian Universalist, we are a faith built on promise. We are a faith built on the fact that we are keeping covenant together. And so inherently in that, you cannot be a Unitarian Universalist alone. Because in your aloneness, you don't have covenant. You don't have community. You don't have relationship and all these things that come together when we build a church. That's a controversial statement to say you can't be a Unitarian Universalist alone. But I actually really believe that. I believe that Unitarian Universalism happens in beloved community. It happens when we gather together. In the Bible, it says that, God is there when two or more are gathered in his name, right? And so that same concept is there in Christianity as well. But I think it's there with our faith of Unitarian Universalism too, that covenant can only happen, the beloved community can only happen when we are gathered together. And then when you look at that, just as you do with saying, okay, the organs together form a person, people together form a community, churches together form a faith, form a religion. And we are stronger and different and more because of our connection to Unitarian Universalism. If we were one independent little church, we would still be a church, but we would not be part of a movement. We would not have the resources that our faith brings us that come together because we are more than one. When you have one church, you don't have a curricula being produced. You don't have websites being generated by an association. You don't have a settlement department that has a whole process for getting ministers. You don't have vetting of ministers and all this. There are things we get because we are part of Unitarian Universalism, and that makes us stronger. When I think about our church's history, I often think about the fact that there used to be 3 Universalist churches in Jackson County, and they were all about 10 miles from the city of Jackson. And today, there is one Universalist Unitarian church in Jackson County. And of those 3 churches, only one of them joined the UUA when the UUA was formed. The other 2 went other paths, and they are no longer Unitarian Universalist churches today. Now, one of them is at least a practicing church, and the other one exists as sort of a historical society, but they are not part of our faith anymore because they didn't join this organization, and they are no longer Universalist because they didn't join our association. And that to me speaks to the strength that we get from this bond of connection. We get the strength now that's going to be helping us through the next couple of years as we navigate this transition because we are part of a larger system. And it's something greater than the individual parts. And so that's what I was thinking about as I was thinking about emergence last night. And I have to say, thank you, Joe, for saying something that I didn't understand and prompting me to look for more. Because without his doing that, I wouldn't have realized that this idea of emergence means so much more than buds coming up from the ground, although that's wonderful and miraculous too, but kind of off topic for this weather. And so that's the thought I want to leave with you today, that people together and that churches together are greater together than we are apart. And to say, bravo to you for all of already knowing that before I told you.